Nobody in that prison had the slightest clue that the most dangerous man of them all was right there, sitting in silence with his steaming tray of food, letting himself get clowned by someone who wouldn't survive a single hit from him. Quiet, detached, like all the chaos and violence around him was just background noise. But that silence, it started to feel heavy, a threat without a word. Blackridge Penitentiary was hell hidden out in the Arizona desert. A block of concrete wrapped in razor wire and armed towers where redemption didn't exist, only survival. Inside, rules weren't written, they were carved in blood and fists. Power was everything, and every block had its own king. In Block D, that crown belonged to Victor "Tank" Morales, a monster built like a wrecking ball, close to 300 pounds of muscle and rage, inked head to toe with gang tattoos. He ran the place on fear alone. His favorite hobby? Breaking new fish in front of an audience. That muggy morning, the cafeteria buzzed different. A fresh face had landed. Nathan Lee, 30, skinny build, pale skin, dark eyes, calm as stone, fresh blues, clean face, no scars. He sat alone, like a lamb waiting for slaughter, too neat, too quiet, the kind of guy who didn't fit in Blackridge, which made him the perfect target. Tank moved through the room like a predator marking his turf. The other inmates, men hardened by years of survival, parted, circling up to watch. It wasn't just fear, it was ritual. Grinning, Tank planted one filthy boot on Nathan's table, heel inches from his plate. In the other hand, he held a bowl of rice. Leaning over, his shadow swallowing Nathan whole, he dumped fistfuls of it across the tray. "Welcome to D-Block, Princess," he growled, his voice low and mocking, carrying that venom that promised violence. "Around here you don't even chew without my say-so." Laughter cracked the silence, nervous, sharp, the kind that dies quick. But all eyes stayed locked on Nathan. He didn't flinch, didn't bark back, just picked up his chopsticks, lifted a piece of meat, placed it in his mouth, chewed slow, calm, never once looking at Tank. The steam from his food rose like smoke from a battlefield waiting to erupt. It wasn't courage, it wasn't fear, it was control, pure, unnerving control. Tank's smirk faltered. He was used to screams, pleas, even trash talk, anything he could crack down on. But this silence dug under his skin. He was ready for sparks. But Nathan wasn't a match. He was dynamite, waiting. Tank pulled back with a forced laugh, trying to cover the unease. He stomped back to his table to fake applause from his goons. But inside, something gnawed at him. For the first time, he hadn't broken someone. That night, whispers spread through Blackridge like infection. "That guy ain't normal. Nobody shrugs Tank off like that and walks away. What the hell's he even doing here?" The COs pulled Nathan's file and found nothing. No gang ties, no priors for violence, no link to any crew. He just appeared. And nobody just appeared in Blackridge. The next morning in the yard, Tank locked eyes with him again. It was like a pit bull realizing it was staring down a lion in disguise. And the air shifted. The whole block held its breath. Because behind that calm stare, everyone started to feel it. The real show hadn't even begun. Blackridge Penitentiary wasn't just a place where criminals were locked up under watch. It was a city walled off from the world, patrolled by guard towers, surrounded by miles of burning desert. Inside those cold blocks and echoing corridors, an unspoken order ruled. Anyone who failed to grasp it vanished, into the hole, into the infirmary, or into the ground. The gangs had their turf carved out. White supremacists ran Block A. The Armenian mob had Block C. Block D, the worst of them all, was a dumping ground for the most violent scraps of every other crew, a powder keg of rivalries. And at the top of it sat Victor "Tank" Morales, ruling with an iron fist and the promise of pain. but ever since that scene in the chow hall, the air had shifted. Nathan Lee stuck to a routine that rattled people. He woke at exactly 6 a.m., folded his blanket with military precision, dropped to the floor for push-ups, then walked to the yard with measured steps. He spoke to no one, met no one's eyes, yet he saw everything. Officer Roy Beckett, a prison veteran who'd somehow survived over 2 decades in Blackridge, noticed. "This guy doesn't belong here," he told the warden, flipping through Nathan's file. "Nothing adds up, no prior bids, no serious charges, and his transfer came straight from the top brass. Orders without explanations. You know who gets that kind of paperwork? Plants." The warden frowned but said nothing. In a place like Blackridge, even theories could get you killed. Meanwhile, rumors spread through the blocks like wildfire. "He used to be Navy, I heard. Word is he wiped out a cartel all by himself. He speaks Japanese or Russian. Hell, he ain't from around here." Even Ramon the Silencer, Tank's old enforcer, famous for making new fish disappear, hesitated when he crossed paths with Nathan in the hall. "Something's off with that dude," Ramon muttered to Tank. "Doesn't blink, doesn't shake, knows too much." Tank laughed it off, but deep down, something gnawed at him. How could a guy like Nathan act as if he didn't exist? Not even the gang bosses disrespected him like that. And now the whole prison was buzzing about a skinny newcomer who hadn't even thrown a punch. In cell 32D, Nathan kept a journal. Not on paper, on the wall. Tiny sketches and symbols scratched faintly into the concrete. Codes, maps, guard schedules. Mental notes only someone trained could make sense of. At night, he practiced breathing drills, slowing his heartbeat, controlling every reaction like a machine. No rush, no wasted motion. One of the old-timers, a lifer known only as Reed, a Gulf War vet doing time for killing a federal agent, watched him from afar. "I've seen guys like that before," Reed whispered through the bars. "They don't breathe like the rest of us. They wait, they measure, and when they strike, nobody sees it coming." Nathan wasn't looking for trouble, but he never backed down either. When a smaller inmate shoved him in the hall, Nathan just stared until the man stepped back. When his towel went missing in the showers, it reappeared in his hand. No one knew how. When Tank had his cell tossed, nothing turned up, and Tank didn't dare lay a finger on him. As the days passed, the prison itself began to shift. Guards whispered, inmates watched, the predators hesitated. And Tank, he dreamed of him, dreamed of that unblinking stare, of that absence of fear, dreamed of being the one sitting alone while everyone else around him shook. Because Tank knew deep down, Nathan Lee wasn't just another prisoner, and if he was in Blackridge, in that living hell, it was for a reason far bigger than anyone could imagine. Weeks blurred together, packed tight with tension. Block D, once filled with screams, threats, and daily beatdowns, had sunk into an uneasy silence. Nathan Lee's presence, quiet as it was, shifted the rhythm of the entire prison. He was like a live bomb buried in the desert, still but ready to go off at any second. Tank Morales hated it. Every time he walked past and saw Nathan sitting tall, eating in silence, something twisted inside him. It felt like being stalked by a predator he couldn't see, and Tank despised that feeling. By the third week, the inevitable started to take shape. Tank called in his two main hitters, Silas, an ex-boxer banned for killing a man in the ring, and Trigger Mason, a firebug with a talent for ambushes. Together, they mapped out what would look like an accident. Tomorrow. In the yard, when he comes out from the showers, Silas goes for the knee, Trigger cracks his throat with the broomstick. Don't kill him, yet, but he'll learn respect. At exactly 2:15, like every day, Nathan walked out from the showers, his uniform still damp, folding his towel with almost ritual precision. Silas leaned against a pillar. Trigger waited in the shadows. But before they could move, Nathan stopped. He glanced at the nearest security camera, then turned his head slightly, smiling. Silas froze. Trigger swallowed hard. They didn't know why, but they knew it wasn't going to end well, and it didn't. In a blink, Nathan twisted out of the way of a strike that hadn't even started. One clean move, and the broomstick snapped in half. Silas lunged, but Nathan slipped behind him, locking a nerve hold into his shoulder, dropping the giant like dead weight. No punches, no struggle. Brutal precision. Trigger backed off, hands raised. "Hey, man! I didn't even touch him. I swear." Nathan just looked at him, then released Silas, leaving him gasping on the floor. He didn't say a word, just kept walking. The cameras, at least the ones still working, caught only blurs. Guards didn't step in, and in the official report, nothing happened. But inside, everything had changed. Tank felt the hit, not on his body, on his pride. 2 of his men dropped by a ghost, effortless, without drama, and worse, without retaliation. No gang rose up, no unplanned payback. Instead, looks of respect began to spread, and fear. Even Reed, the Gulf War vet who usually just watched, did something he never did. Walked up to Nathan's cell. "You know, kid, most guys here try to look tough. You just are." Nathan glanced up. "I don't care about looking like anything. I only came for what I need." Reed raised his brows. "And what's that?" Nathan's eyes turned cold, the kind of cold forged in places worse than hell. "Information." Across the prison, Officer Roy Beckett noticed strange movement in the system. Confidential files accessed with federal clearance, partial orders, erased trails. Nathan Lee wasn't a glitch in the system. He'd been placed there. Tank, burning with humiliation, destroyed his own cell, shattered the mirror, punched the wall until his fists bled. When the guards came, they didn't restrain him. They knew this wasn't rage, it was ego, shattered, bleeding, breaking apart. That same day, Tank made his move. Nathan had to die, but not by his hand. He had connections outside, money stashed in crypto accounts, deals with militias, and one name, Shadow. A former soldier booted for torture, now a contract killer. Soon he'd be brought in as a transfer. The silent war had a date now, but Nathan already knew. He knew about the plan, about Shadow, because he'd been waiting for it. It was part of the mission. What had started with a meal was now unfolding into something much bigger, a covert operation, a criminal network buried inside the US prison system, and one man, alone, sent in with a mission to burn it all down. The chow hall wasn't the same anymore. Nathan's table, once empty, was now surrounded by eyes, some curious, some fearful. He still ate alone, but whispers carried louder than the old shouts ever did. Reed had become his closest shadow. Always nearby, pretending not to care, but studying every move. One quiet night, he finally asked the question, "Who'd you come here to take down?" Nathan didn't even look at him. "Whoever needs to be taken down." Reed chuckled low, like that confirmed a suspicion he'd carried all along. Meanwhile, in admin, Roy Beckett wrestled with a dangerous truth. Digging through the system, he found a pattern. 4 recent transfers into Blackridge, all tied to fallen federal agents. And one name locked behind encrypted files, Nathaniel Lee, not listed as a regular inmate, his real record sealed under Homeland Security clearance. For the first time in years, Beckett picked up the phone to an old friend at the FBI. "You ever heard of a guy named Nathan Lee?" A pause on the line. Then, "Forget that name, Roy, and don't touch it. If he's there, it's because someone way above us put him there." Outside the walls, the wheels turned. Shadow had been arrested on arms trafficking charges and was scheduled for transfer to Blackridge in 72 hours. Everyone knew it was a setup. A killer was being delivered into the country's most dangerous prison with one target. Nathan knew. He'd gotten the signal. On his cell wall, his scratches connected into a map. Red marks, blue marks, black marks, guard movement, camera blind spots, patrol times, a warboard hidden in plain sight. And then, a new player stepped in, Vanessa Cruz, a human rights lawyer, ex-NGO investigator who'd once exposed prison abuse, came in to see Reed. On her way out, she crossed paths with Nathan. She froze. "Lee?" He didn't answer, but their eyes met. Recognition and something deeper, an old alliance. Vanessa left Blackridge without a word, but she knew if Nathan was inside, something big was about to fall, and she needed to be ready. Inside, the tension snapped tighter. Tank was losing his grip. His own men were disappearing. Trigger was found mangled in the laundry. No witnesses, no noise, but everyone knew it had Nathan's silence written all over it. Blackridge had become a minefield. Nathan knew his time was short. Once Shadow arrived, the chaos would break loose, and in that chaos, he'd move. Because Blackridge wasn't just a cage for violent men, it was the beating heart of a network, gun running, money laundering, contract killings, political ties, and at the center, Tank Morales, a pawn who thought he was king. Nathan wasn't there for revenge, not for personal justice. He was there with a mission to burn the system down from the inside. And now, with Shadow inbound, Vanessa rallying allies on the outside, and Beckett torn between duty and conscience, the clock was ticking. The countdown had begun. The desert sky was leaden that morning, thick and stifling, like the weather itself knew something was coming that would change everything. At 9:47 a.m., the gates of Blackridge Federal Penitentiary opened for the new inmate. The file read, Derek Malone, 42, ex-military, weapons trafficking. What actually walked in was Shadow, the killer the underworld whispered about as the ghost assassin. Outside, nobody suspected a thing. Inside, nobody knew, except Nathan Lee. The moment Shadow stepped into Block D, his face mapped with scars, his eyes empty of any empathy, Nathan knew the hunt had begun. The first hours passed in a hush. Shadow was assigned to cell 34D, just 2 doors down from Nathan. He didn't speak. Nobody approached him. His presence was a warning in itself. Tank Morales gave him a curt nod in the yard. No words, just a look. Shadow barely inclined his head. A pact sealed. From that instant, Nathan had to shift tactics. Until then, he'd ruled the room by calm. Now he had to survive a straight-up war. In the dead of night, he heard different footsteps in the corridors, not guard boots. Through the slit in his steel door, he saw 2 figures pause outside his cell. Silence. Then something slid beneath the door. A small, improvised blade. The message was plain. Defend yourself. Nathan didn't touch the weapon. The next morning, the first strike came from where he least expected. Reed, the old vet. During yard time, as Reed passed Nathan, he shoved him hard into the railing. Nathan hit the ground, rolled, and rose into a defensive stance without throwing a punch. "Did they get to you?" Reed ground out between his teeth. Reed's eyes were hollow as he whispered, "There's no out. Either you end it now, or they kill Vanessa." For the first time, Nathan's control slipped for a second. Vanessa Cruz. She was too involved. He never thought the organization would reach her, at least not at this stage of the operation. What had been a slow plan now went sideways. They'd crossed a line. In admin, Officer Roy Beckett saw odd things on the cameras. Some prison feeds were corrupted. Nathan's cell was one of them. Someone inside the system was prepping an ambush. Beckett tried Vanessa. No answer. 2 calls. On the 3rd, the line dropped. Something was wrong. Back in his cell, Nathan did the unthinkable. He triggered the red protocol. Among the scratches and codes on his wall, there was a specific mark, a micro device he'd implanted weeks earlier. Press it, and it sent a scrambled signal on alternating frequencies, invisible to the prison systems. A response would come within 12 hours. He only had to survive until then. That night, the attack came. At 3:27 a.m., Block D's lights flickered 3 times, an altered pattern. That was the signal. Nathan woke. He was ready. His cell door opened. Illegally, quietly. 2 hooded men stepped inside. They didn't know. Nathan was already behind them. The first went down with his neck snapped before he could figure out what hit him. The second drew a blade, but Nathan flung gritty soap into his eyes, part of a plan cobbled together with nothing. When he neutralized him, Nathan saw something he hadn't expected. One of the attackers was a guard. The strike wasn't only coming from the blocks, it ran all the way up the chain of command. He realized his mission carried risk beyond what anyone had guessed. Not just Tank, not just Shadow. The whole system was rotten to the core. At dawn, Nathan walked into the yard, clean face, clean uniform, as if nothing had happened. Shadow watched him. So did Tank. Both knew they'd failed. By morning, a heavy quiet hung over the place. Even the worst inmates moved like they had to, cautious, reverent in a way. There was a forced kind of respect in the air, aimed at a man who, on paper, should have been dead. Nathan Lee hadn't just survived. He marched into the yard, uniform spotless, body whole, eyes colder than ever, and nobody could say how. Tank sat at the far table, fists clenched. This was no longer about control, it was humiliation. For the first time, the creeping sense of irrelevance closed in on him. Shadow handled it differently, silence. Since the botched hit, he hadn't said a word. He patrols the yard, circling leaders, testing loyalties, watching who bends to the new center of gravity, Nathan. Among the guards, chaos smoldered. The body found in cell 33D had been moved under the guise of suicide. Roy Beckett knew that was a lie. The cameras were dead, records doctored, and nobody said a thing. Then the unexpected visit came. Director Sandoval arrived flanked by 2 government agents, supposedly from Homeland Security. "We're reviewing the placement of certain elements here," they announced. Roy said nothing, just watched them hand a sealed envelope to the director. Later, thanks to a registry slip-up, he saw the documents, and his worst fears were confirmed. Nathan Lee wasn't just a special agent on assignment. He was a direct threat to a subterranean operation that kept Blackridge running as a machine for money laundering and contract executions. Worse, he'd been set up. The original mission called for 6 months of deep cover. Now they wanted him gone. Roy looked in the bathroom mirror and felt ashamed. He couldn't protect Nathan. But he couldn't turn away either. Nathan kept his routines with military precision, but something had changed. He stepped up the tempo, more markings on the wall, new routes, avoiding predictable times. Each move grew urgent. In the library, where few went, he met Reed. No greetings, just code. "Vanessa's gone," Nathan said. Reed nodded. "They're tightening the noose. Even the old system's starting to crack." "Now or never," Nathan replied. He slid a note under a book. Reed read it and tucked it away. "This is going to start a war," Reed said. "A war's what they deserve," Nathan answered. That night the halls hummed. Inmates whispered about beefed-up security, rumors of a mass transfer, talk that Nathan himself would be moved. But no one touched him. Not Tank, not Shadow, not their crews. Everyone waited for the next move. In the small hours when the power cut exactly for 2 minutes, Roy Beckett knew it wasn't an accident. It was the protocol response. Nathan was priming a full exposé. Cameras off, doors locked, guards on break. The prison's infrastructure started to show cracks, and Nathan, scheming like a strategist, sized each one up as a potential entry. But time was running out. Shadow had new orders. This time, he wasn't to kill. He was to extract. They wanted to know what Nathan knew. Tank, unwittingly, was cleared to help, not as boss, but as bait. Nathan's cell was swapped in the dead of night. He woke up in another block, darker, more isolated, easier to control. What the powers that be didn't realize was that this too fit his plan. Nathan purposely wanted to be taken to the bowels of hell, because that's where the real monsters lived. And it was from that pit that he intended to tear the whole thing down. The new block was known as the Ghost Corridor, a forgotten wing of Blackridge Penitentiary. No cameras, no windows, damp walls and rusted bars, no routine, no rules. Just survival. It was where they sent the broken, the unstable, or the ones the system wanted to erase quietly. Nathan Lee knew he was exactly where he needed to be, but he also knew he wouldn't leave unscarred. The first night, silence was his only ally. The second, hunger. The third, the freezing cell, no mattress, water dripping from the ceiling. But the real test came on the fourth night. 3 men, big, strong, trained, sent by someone beyond tank, beyond shadow. They weren't there to kill him. They were there to break him. The beating was ruthless, precise, unforgiving. Nathan fought back, not to win, but to survive. Blood, cracked ribs, blurred vision. But he never screamed. When he woke, sprawled across the metal floor, he realized he was closer to breaking than he'd ever been. The pride that once fueled his silence now felt useless. His muscles ached. His fingers shook. And for the first time he thought about failing. Then he saw it. The mark. A tiny scratch in the cell wall, made with the loose screw he'd hidden in his uniform before the transfer. It was a code, a reminder, left by him, for him. This isn't about you. It's about what's still to come. The pain didn't fade, but the purpose reignited. Over the next days, battered and sore, Nathan dragged himself to the sink, washed the blood carefully, tore seams from his shirt to make bandages, stretched, breathed deep, reset. And that reset didn't go unnoticed. The inmates in the Ghost Corridor, wild men, abandoned for years, began to watch him. Not like an equal, like something that didn't belong, someone different, someone who didn't ask for help, someone who endured. Among them, a man known only as Briggs, locked away for serial murder, did something unheard of. He offered Nathan a piece of bread. Nathan refused, but he gave a small nod. In Blackridge, that was enough to spark a revolution. Outside, Vanessa Cruz resurfaced. Bruised, hiding, clutching leaked documents from inside Blackridge, she met Roy Beckett at a gas station, undercover. They activated the Shadow Protocol. "I know," Roy muttered. "They're trying to kill him from the inside. We have to blow this wide open, or Nathan dies." Together they began a desperate plan, expose Blackridge to the federal press. Back inside, Nathan's body faltered, but his mind stayed razor-sharp. He studied guard shifts, light cycles, generator pauses. And then he acted, piece by piece, wire by wire. He turned his cell into an improvised command center, made contact outside, resent the signal, confirmed escape routes, and for the first time he spoke aloud, to himself. "There's still time." That moment marked a shift. Nathan stopped being just the hidden soldier. He became the war strategist. Survival wasn't enough. He had to lead. The first step, win the forgotten, the ghosts. The inmates of the Ghost Corridor, stripped of hope but still burning inside. Nathan started speaking to them. Few words, precise, enough. One night, Briggs looked at him. "You want out? I can open the door. But then what?" Nathan answered, "Then we bring the Empire down." For the first time since walking into Blackridge, Nathan wasn't alone anymore. Blackridge no longer breathed the same. The air felt heavier. Inmates whispered softer. The tension seeped into the concrete, the flickering lights, the guards carrying double the firepower. Everyone felt it. Something was about to happen. In the Ghost Corridor, where Nathan had turned his cell into an intelligence bunker, everything moved according to plan. Briggs, the serial killer who never spoke, was now coordinating trusted inmates. They didn't know who Nathan really was, but they knew he was their only shot at getting out alive with some dignity. In Block D, Tank Morales felt power slipping through his fingers. Shadow hadn't been seen in days. What few allies Tank still had avoided him. His reign was ending, and he was the last to admit it. Outside, Vanessa Cruz and Roy Beckett worked in sync. Vanessa, sheltered by a contact in the prosecutor's office, began leaking documents to investigative journalists. Roy, still officially a guard, risked his life planting bugs and pulling files from Blackridge's system. The night before the big move, Nathan wrote his final orders. The plan had 3 stages: collapse the internal power grid using the backup generator to selectively open doors in the ghost corridor and carve a path to admin block. Leak internal data to external encrypted servers with devices hacked together inside the cell. Go public in real time, with the press on standby and Vanessa filing an official complaint to the FBI. Nathan wasn't chasing escape. He was aiming to bring Blackridge down from the inside, with proof, with names, with faces. That night he gathered the men of the corridor. Tomorrow, if it works, the whole country will look here. And what will they see? Briggs asked, eyes hard. They'll see men who said no one last time. And if it fails? Nathan drew a deep breath. Then we sink this hell with us. Across the prison, a guard slipped a folded note into a laundry uniform pocket. Inside, one line. 1202, East Tower. Start with the auxiliary breaker. The chain was set in motion. In the cafeteria, Tank ate alone, eyes locked on the clock. He knew this was his last chance, rise again or be forgotten like the predators before him. In the watchtower, Roy Beckett breathed deep, finger hovering over the security override. In the yard, the Arizona sky grew heavy with clouds, as if nature itself braced for impact. 1201. Nathan closed his eyes. 1202. The generator blew sparks. Lights flickered. Alarms fell silent. Doors unlocked in sequence. Nathan's cell swung open. He didn't run. He walked. Behind him, a dozen men followed in silence, the kind of silence that comes before destruction. Across the prison, Shadow reappeared, ready to finish the job he'd been sent for. And high above the block, Tank gripped the iron bar he'd hidden behind his toilet for years. All the threads, all the schemes, all the masks, now stripped away. Blackridge's civil war had a time, a place, and its chosen players. 1203. The sirens were still dead, the power grid flickering between life and collapse. The doors of the ghost corridor had been unlocked, but the alarms were silent, a direct effect of the overloaded backup generator. Nathan led a small group of inmates through the central hall, every step measured like a countdown. They weren't escaping, they were marching. North side now, he ordered Briggs, who signaled the others. Each had a role: unlock the manual latches, cut the cameras, secure the access routes. They weren't soldiers, but Nathan had trained them to move like one in the past weeks. 1205. In Block D, Tank Morales armed himself, iron bar gripped tight, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the gate. Today we end this fraud, he muttered to himself. But he didn't know it was already too late. The chain of command had been compromised. The system was collapsing from within, exposed live to national media. High in Tower 2, Roy Beckett clutched his radio with trembling hands. Live transmission stable. We're connected. You sure you want to go through with this? The journalist on the other end asked. More than ever. Record everything. They need to see it with their own eyes. 1208. In the admin wing, Vanessa Cruz broke into the servers with the help of a federal tech. Evidence poured out in batches: videos, torture footage, bank transfers, falsified reports. The outside world was beginning to react, but inside Blackridge, hell boiled. 1210. Nathan reached the stairwell leading to Block D. He stopped, breathed. He knew Shadow was near. Footsteps echoed. The showdown was inevitable, but what came next wasn't expected. Shadow stepped out, unarmed. "You're good, Lee, damn good." "I don't have time for compliments." Shadow raised his hands. "They used me too. Planned to put me down right after you." "Then why stay?" "Because I came to finish what I started, just in a different way. I'm not their dog anymore." Nathan hesitated, then tossed him one of the keys to the internal locks. "Then prove it. Open the infirmary. Free the ones still alive." Shadow nodded. Without another word, he shifted from enemy to ally. 12:13. Tank stormed into Block D's entrance with two brutes at his side. He saw Nathan alone, walking toward him. "Time's up, Princess," Tank snarled, spinning the iron bar. "This whole joint's gonna remember who runs it." Nathan kept walking, calm. "Remember when you stomped on my food? You should have bowed right then. No, that's when I started tearing you down." Tank roared and lunged. The clash was savage. Metal against flesh. Raw strength versus precise technique. Nathan took hits. He bled, but he endured. With 3 clean moves, he dismantled Tank, snapped his wrist, dropped him with a kick to the leg, pinned him with a knee to the chest. "You don't even run yourself anymore," Nathan said, breathless. Tank tried to speak, but spit blood. Around them, inmates watched in silence. No doubts remained. Blackridge had a new name at the top. Not a tyrant, a man on a mission. 12:20. Every camera was back online. Footage streamed live to federal networks and journalists. Prisoners freed from the infirmary, corrupt guards scrambling to flee, shredded documents flying down the halls. Blackridge was falling second by second. Nathan took a guard's radio. "This is Agent Nathaniel Lee. Blackridge Federal Penitentiary is in full collapse. Proof of corruption and systemic murder has been released to the press, requesting immediate medical evac for prisoners at risk. And I want Justice Department boots here to collect what's left, because the rest is already gone." On the other end, a voice crackled back. "Confirmed. Federal forces inbound. You did it, Lee." Nathan looked up at the sky beyond the walls. The sound of helicopters grew louder. The war was over, but the price was still to be paid. 48 hours after Blackridge fell, the gates stood wide open. Not from neglect, because there was nothing left to guard. Federal forces occupied the site. Corrupt officers were cuffed and hauled away. Gang leaders, some in critical condition, others in shock, were transferred to holding facilities. The media blasted the hidden crimes of the penitentiary across every major network. Public opinion swung between outrage and disbelief. How could something this brutal exist for so long, right under the government's nose? Vanessa Cruz was the first to face the cameras, dossier in hand. She named names, handed over proof, and made it clear none of it would have been possible without Nathaniel Lee, the man who spent months buried in hell. His name never appeared in official reports. The government never confirmed his identity. But to everyone who'd been inside Blackridge, he was the one who brought down the empire of iron and blood. Tank Morales was found unconscious, tied to his own bed. Transferred under max security, he was thrown into indefinite isolation. He never spoke again. Shadow, on the other hand, vanished. Records showed he'd been escorted out by federal agents in a black van, no destination given. Some say he was flipped as an informant. Others swear he just faded back into the dark. Briggs and the inmates from the ghost corridor were relocated. Those who cooperated with Nathan saw their sentences reviewed. For the first time, many spoke of hope. Maybe they weren't monsters after all, just men who needed purpose. And Nathan, no one really knew where he went. Some claim he returned to the agency. Others swear he was spotted on another continent, knee-deep in something bigger. Roy Beckett received a letter with no sender. Inside, a single line: "Justice sometimes starts inside the cell." Roy resigned soon after. He's writing a book. The Blackridge case became a landmark. New laws proposed, investigations launched in other prisons. But what lingered most was the legend. of a man who walked in unnoticed, endured monsters, faced corruption head-on, and brought it all crashing down with patience, intelligence, and purpose. Blackridge turned to ashes. But the name that echoed in the silent halls, even days after evacuation, was just one: Lee. 3 months later, in a narrow street in Seoul, South Korea, a man in a black cap and backpack slipped through the crowded market, his steps precise, discreet. He stopped at a newsstand. A headline in English caught his eye: U.S. prison system shaken after Blackridge scandal. Where is the unknown agent? He smiled, just faintly, ran his fingers over the scar on his chin, then disappeared into the crowd as if he'd never been there. In his pocket, a new prison file, a new name. Mission started. If you made it this far, you walked out of Blackridge with Nathan Lee. This isn't just a story about violence or revenge. It's about silent courage, justice born inside the system, and the strength it takes to face monsters without becoming one. Now it's your turn. What would you do if you were locked inside a place where everyone else had already given up? Share this story. Drop your theories. And tell me, do you think Nathan Lee truly disappeared? Or is he already deep undercover in another hell?